LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
This is the construct.
Right now, we're inside a computer program.
Is it really so hard to believe? Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
This is it, you see. This is the cage of your own making, which keeps you trapped and pacing about in the smallest possible space forever. Break out now.
I'm feeling a little disconnected from my real life. I'm kind of losing touch with the texture of it, you know what I mean? I actually think there's an element of psychosis involved here.
Yes! This is a great sign. It means your nervous system is fully engaging with the game architecture.
I'm not sure here, where we are, is real at all. This feels like a game to me.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Vlatko Vedral, who joins us to discuss his book, Decoding Reality The Universe as Quantum Information. What is the nature of reality? Why is there something rather than nothing? These are the deepest questions that human beings have asked, that thinkers east and west pondered over for millennia. For a physicist, all the world is information. The universe and its workings are the ebb and flow of information. We are all transient patterns of information, passing on this pattern for our basic forms to future generations using a digital code called DNA. Decoding Reality asks some of the deepest questions about the universe and considers the implications of interpreting it in terms of information. It explains the nature of information, the idea of entropy, and the roots of this thinking in thermodynamics. It describes the bizarre effects of quantum behaviour such as entanglement, which Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and explores cutting-edge work on harnessing quantum effects in hyperfast quantum computers, and how recent evidence suggests that the weirdness of the quantum world, once thought limited to the tiniest scales, may reach up into our reality. The book concludes by considering the answer to the ultimate question: where did all the information in the universe come from? The answers considered are exhilarating and challenge our concept of the nature of matter, of time, of free will, and of reality itself. Hello and welcome, Vlatko, and thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to talk to you.
Now, today we're going to be talking about your book, which is entitled Decoding Reality, The Universe as Quantum Information. Before we dive into that, perhaps you could just tell listeners a bit about your background, how you became interested in this, the aspect of science that you currently work in.
Yes, I think I was fascinated by quantum mechanics, of course, right from the start when I learned that it has many counterintuitive features with respect to the everyday intuition. And then what I actually realized is that in order to gain information about one quantum system, usually you need to interact it with another quantum system. And it actually all boils down to correlations between different systems. So, if you want to measure light, you have to couple light to matter. And then actually what you do is really you convert the state of light into the state of matter, and then you measure that. And then I became really interested in how to quantify the amount of information that's actually conveyed through this interaction. And I realized that it can only really be understood through quantum entanglement, which is the quantum form of correlation. And that really prepared me then to start to analyze entanglement. And that's what I really did my PhD on, how to quantify entanglement.
Okay, well, the bottom line here really particularly for non-scientific listeners is that you're postulating that information, when we're looking at the fundamental nature of reality, is more fundamental than either matter or energy. Because one of the hot button talking points in recent years has been that everything in the universe is energy, and it is on one level, but you're saying information is more fundamental.
Yes, I think if you open the Oxford Dictionary and you look at the definition of physics, physics would be defined something like the science that studies energy and matter and the interaction between energy and matter. And I think that's a pretty good definition. But of course, at some point, you have to become also curious about the origin of energy and matter, because postulating that we have a lot of matter around us and postulating that we also observe a lot of energy doesn't really explain the origin of these entities. And if you start to ask yourself, where do they come from? Then I think we need a concept that's deeper than both of these. And the only concept that seems to me to be more fundamental is really the concept of information.
Yeah, well, we do need something new, don't we, really? Because, I mean, neither religion nor science have offered a complete account of what we see out there. And, of course, for non-religious people, who are, most scientists would be non-religious.
Yes.
Religion's not important for that. It can't answer needs. All it can do is plug a gap with a fantasy. That's how a lot of people see it. But of course, you point out in the book, and this becomes clear when you start to read even popular science books, is that many of the things that your man in the street might think are established about cutting-edge science or even classical physics are not. They're still quite fluid. They're not settled. It's ongoing, and this is why you've been searching for something below and behind all this that can really answer the questions of where the origins of reality of the universe.
Yes, I think that's actually very true. That's the main point, that when we start explaining natural phenomena, we already start with quite a lot of information. So basically, we start with the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics. And we start with the laws of gravity. And then as far as we are concerned, these two put together can explain all the experimental observations around us and everything else we see in the universe. But even when you look at quantum physics on its own, writing down the laws of quantum physics already conveys a huge amount of information. So we have the Schrödinger equation there, which is thought to govern all the basic interactions in quantum mechanics. But if you want to understand where the Schrödinger equation itself comes from, then of course the answer is not written in the Schrödinger equation. So this equation just has to be postulated. And if you ask yourself why this equation and not some other equation, then we really don't have any answer of that kind in physics. We cannot go deeper than that as far as things are concerned. And what's dissatisfying to physicists in particular is that the formulation of quantum mechanics as it stands now is really very abstract and very mathematical. And it seems to us that underneath that very mathematical facade, there must be something deeper that can be conveyed in a simpler, more physical way. And so I'm hoping, and I think there is a number of us who basically are hoping that the laws of quantum mechanics can be reduced to far simpler laws that would involve some kind of information processing. And you're absolutely right that neither science nor philosophy nor religion really tell us how to go beyond this method.
Well, you touched there upon the problem of trying to organize a principle that would, or describe a principle that would explain everything, but
Yes.
it can't explain itself. And this is the idea of the infinite regression, which is where everybody ends up when they say, why is there something rather than nothing? Because then you're looking at the idea of we need an event with no cause in order to get something
Yes.
from nothing, and we go round and round in circles. And even the vast majority of scientists are basically doing the same thing. It's like I can't remember what movie it's in, but there's a gag, and the guy was talking about, well, if the universe ends, then what's stopping it, and what's behind what's stopping it, and on and on. And
Yes.
if you can't break that cycle, then you can't move beyond that point.
Yes, I think you're right. This is probably a mystery that was already noted by the ancient Greeks, and they thought a lot about it. They thought about, what lies beyond the universe. Is there an end to the universe, an edge of the universe, and so on? And they had all sorts of arguments that went back and forth. And you ended up excluding both of these possibilities, that the universe is finite or that the universe is infinite, because both of them seem to be somehow contradictory to our intuition, basic intuition. And I think it's a very similar position that we have in science. When you mentioned this now, you reminded me of Spinoza, who was a Jewish, Dutch, actually. Ultimately, he ended up in Holland. Basically philosopher who had this philosophy that everything has to have a cause that explains its existence. And he believed that the whole universe is, in this sense, completely self-explanatory. So that means that the universe has to, within itself, contain its own explanation at the same time. So this is a little bit like what we are after, as you mentioned. We'd like to have a principle which hopefully then also somehow contains its own explanation within itself. And it's really hard to imagine that. In fact, what led Spinoza to this is simply a belief that everything is deterministic in the universe. So if you follow this logic, that every effect has a cause that exists prior to that, then basically this kind of logic led him to God, which was kind of, God was seen as the whole causal chain from the first cause down to the whole universe. But I think most people find this logic very dissatisfying, and not only because it's deterministic, but also because it seems to require some kind of notion of the first cause as well that you mentioned. I think quantum mechanics radically changed this idea, and that's why I believe that if you talk about information, it really is more appropriate to think about information as quantum information than as classical information. And the idea is that quantum mechanically we do have events that we observe for which, as far as we are concerned, there are no underlying causes. So I think this chain of causes and effects gets completely broken at the microscopic level of quantum events. And it seems to us that we have things coming up which are genuinely random. They cannot be explained through any other causes. And I think this is a really interesting and exciting possibility.
It's probably worth mentioning as well that you talk a lot about the very nature of information in the book. And
Yes.
People might think what they have is information. It's stuff on bits of paper in books. It's stuff that's on pages of the internet. That's information. It's stuff that they have in their heads.
Yes.
But you touch upon this idea of information being physical, and that was something completely new to me. So perhaps you could just say a little bit about what you mean when you're talking about information.
Yes, I think it's a great question, actually. What I use the specific notion of information, which tries to get rid of all the subjective ideas that you might have behind the notion of information. So anything that depends on our particular human features are not really permitted in this quantification of information. So it doesn't matter which language we are using to communicate. It doesn't matter how we choose to encode our symbols. The only thing that matters is actually the probability for an event to happen. That's all you need in order to quantify the information. And the information is actually quantified in a way that it's inversely proportional to probability. So that means if something is very, very unlikely to happen, and if it still happens, this event would carry a lot of information. So somehow information, according to this logic, is the same as some kind of intuitive notion of surprise. How surprised are you that something has happened? That means that actually, if you're very surprised, that means the event carries a great deal of information. And the other side of this is if something is very likely to happen, and if it happens, of course, then you won't be surprised by this at all, and this would therefore carry very little information. So the example I like to give is the sun rising tomorrow. It's hopefully an event that we all think is extremely likely, and it's been happening for quite a while, and therefore there won't be any surprise when the sun rises tomorrow, and you won't see anyone write about it and so on. Now, if you follow this logic, then in classical world, which is governed by Newtonian mechanics, things either happen with 100% probability or they don't happen at all. So basically, Newtonian mechanics, much like Spinoza's philosophy that I mentioned, is completely deterministic. So if you have all the information about all the particles and all of their positions and speeds now, you can actually calculate using Newton's equations everything that's going to happen in the future. So you have a completely deterministic future, and you don't need to really assign any probabilities to anything. And that's why I think the notion of information is actually rather trivial in some sense. It's superfluous in the Newtonian world. On the other hand, when you go to the quantum level, we have things that really genuinely happen without any prior causes. And the only thing we can do with events like that is we can assign a probability to them. There's nothing deeper than that as far as quantum mechanics is concerned. So it seems to me that the notion of information as a function of probability becomes much more important and relevant when you go down to the quantum level. And I think that's something that I try to describe in my book.
In this, how can I put it, in this sort of informational realm, is this anything similar to like Bohm's implicate order?
That's also a good point that I think Bohm was using the notion of quantum correlations again. Namely that certain things could be random, but when you look at a sequence of events, they could be highly correlated, meaning that if one of them happens, then there is a high chance that the other ones will happen as well. And I think what's interesting about this is that even though the individual events could be completely random and unpredictable, the whole collection of events could actually have a certain ordered structure associated with that. So somehow the whole structure is acausal, meaning that nothing causes it, but the correlation between different events inside this structure are very, very strong. And I think that's exactly what Bohm had in mind. So this is what I call quantum entanglement, and I also talk quite a bit about it in my book.
In terms of the origin of the universe, or from where reality as we perceive it arises, yes. whether you're talking about an old-fashioned medieval idea of a God creator, yes. or a Big Bang, whatever it happens to be, or the quantum information yes. theory, the idea still comes back again to something from nothing. And I know this is just a bit of a philosophical question, but I've talked to many guests about this, but it seems to be so. Well, maybe it needn't be difficult, but to my mind anyway, trying to conceive of nothing. Can nothing exist? Because when I think of nothing, I still think of an empty vessel. It's almost like yes. Nothing is still contained within something.
Yes, I think it's very hard. You are absolutely right. In fact, even in physics, when you talk about the origin of the universe, there are all sorts of theories where the universe is meant to arise spontaneously out of nothing. But actually what physicists mean by this is very similar to what you mentioned. It's akin to the empty vessel, in the sense that you imagine something that we call the physical vacuum, the quantum mechanical vacuum. So that's an empty state in the sense that there are no particles there. There are no particles of light or any other particles. But the state is not really nothingness, because what you've already assumed is you've already assumed the existence of quantum mechanics itself, which is needed to exist prior to this in order for you to even define quantum nothingness on top of it. So when people talk about the universe spontaneously being created out of nothing, they don't really mean out of nothing. They mean given the laws of quantum mechanics, which according to this must have pre-existed in a way. And then of course it becomes, as you said, very hard to imagine where would they have existed if the universe still has not really been created. So I think it's very difficult for us to imagine this state of affairs. So nothingness should really mean nothingness, including that there are no laws of physics, no dynamics, no quantum fields, no Schrödinger equation and things like that. You are right. It's very hard to imagine that.
Well, you give an example. I mean, I'm sort of skipping on to a bit later in the book now about in trying to imagine just a bit of a intellectual exercise, something from nothing.
Yes.
In maths,
yes.
which I was never very good at. You get an idea of an empty set. And I remember our maths teacher drawing an empty set on the blackboard and
yes.
and then putting an empty set inside that. And yet you've said, I mean, you can help me get my head around this if possible, that
yes.
you then have something in there. The empty set has got an empty set in it.
Yes.
And if you put another few empty sets in there, maybe you've got 4 empty sets inside the empty set.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
What I got to thinking was, you've created a number, but what have you created? I mean, if you write it on a piece of paper, you've got a piece of paper. I can't go down to the store and buy number 4 and
yes.
put it in a bag, bring it back home, put it on the side and go, hey, Vlatko, look, I've got a number 4,
yes.
isn't it fancy? I can get a piece of wood that's been carved
yes.
into a shape of a number 4, but that's a piece of wood. And if I write that empty set diagram on the blackboard, it's a blackboard with some chalk marks on it, symbols that we understand. So
yes.
I lay awake last night trying to think about this. It kept me awake until about 3 a.m. until I
yes,
just
think that
just passed out. The idea of, because it seemed that what you'd done was a sort of an intellectual exercise, but nothing had been created.
Absolutely. I think the argument, it's a very beautiful illustration, what you just mentioned, of the principle that information is physical. So you are right, actually. The argument that generates all the integers, if you like, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, out of empty sets is due to a mathematician called von Neumann. And in fact, he really did think about it in an entirely abstract way. So he said, imagine an empty set, which is basically a set that contains nothing. But if you think about the fact that information is physical, which would suggest that you have to write information always into a physical system. You have to use states of your physical system to even convey an empty set. Then as you beautifully illustrated, you still have to write some symbols on a piece of paper in order to convey this empty set. So if you really think that there is no disembodied information, there is no information on its own without the physical representation, then I think von Neumann's idea is really just a completely abstract intellectual exercise, and it cannot really explain anything physical out of that. And I think this point that information is physical is really important, precisely because quantum mechanics is different to classical. Quantum information also obeys different laws to classical information. So I think we do have to acknowledge that information is physical, and we have to acknowledge further that different kinds of physics give rise to different kinds of information. So you're right. Von Neumann's exercise is really very similar to this. Imagine that there is nothing, and then imagine that this nothing contains nothing and another nothing and so on. But then if you ask yourself, what does it mean to imagine nothing, first of all? It obviously means certain states, physical states of neurons inside your head, for example. So even as you're imagining nothing, there's an awful lot of information processing already going on for you to be able to imagine nothing. And I think so it's difficult to really take this argument all the way down to the nothingness, as we discussed it before.
Yeah, so when you're thinking then about, okay, if you then say, my senses tell me that it's not possible for there to be nothing, then you're back at the question of, okay, well, there's always been something, but if there's always been something, how can that possibly be? Yes. And if something has stretched infinitely back into the past, but would do so into the future, but if it wouldn't be, how could it stretch infinitely into the past if it didn't stretch infinitely into the future? Again, we're sort of almost back at square one with that.
Yes,
idea.
I agree. These are very, very difficult questions, certainly philosophically and not just scientifically. And in fact, another thing that I actually was really surprised by when I was researching religion and philosophy for my own book was that so basically, as you know, we are now, of course, more in the realm of philosophy and metaphysics than physics. If you really stick to physics itself, to science itself, then all science does for you is really tells you what the world is not like. I like to speak about science in this negative way, So science puts limitations on what we can do. In the sense of, if you think about relativity, relativity is based on two postulates, and one of them says you cannot detect uniform motion. If you're in an airplane, and if there was no turbulence, and if you couldn't look out of the window, then you could not really tell that you were moving at constant speed, or if you were on a train or anything like that. And the other postulate of relativity says you cannot travel faster than the speed of light. Now, neither of these postulates tells you what you can do in practice. All it says is the limitations. This is what you cannot do, but the rest, may be limited in further ways. And in fact, if you look at, for example, thermodynamics, then it tells you that you cannot violate energy conservation, and it tells you that you cannot violate the second law of thermodynamics. And if you ask yourself, how close can you come to these things? The thermodynamics doesn't really give you an answer to that. It just tells you what you cannot do. And so somehow science eliminates certain wrong pictures that we have about, if you, for example, say, how old is the Earth? We don't really know exactly how old the Earth is. It could be 3.5, 4 billion years old. But what we certainly do know is that it's older than 6,000 years, which maybe some religions would claim. So we can eliminate wrong hypotheses, if you like, but we don't really have necessarily the ultimate answer. And science happens to be an open-ended enterprise in this way, that we are open to correcting ourselves in the future. And what I found interesting when I was researching my book is that there was a bunch of early Christians who lived in Cappadocia in what's now Turkey in the 4th century after Christ. And basically they had a very similar way of talking about God, this negative way. So they didn't want to say positively whether God even existed or didn't exist, but all they would say is what God is not, by excluding properties of God. And it's very interesting that their enterprise was similarly open-ended to the way we think about science and the universe now. And I think that's probably a more appropriate way of talking, rather than jumping to conclusions what the ultimate reality is and so on.
Yes, I think that that plays into the idea about I can't remember. You'll be able to tell us perhaps. In the Victorian era, somebody or some group made a pronouncement that basically, with regard to physics, all the answers were in.
Yes.
We're just fine-tuning it now. And of course,
you
pointing out in your book, there's a fascinating section about how the amount of information in the universe is increasing, and this is pushing frontiers back, and we're always kind of like playing catch-up. And use a donkey and carrot analogy. If you got a stick attached to the head of a donkey with a carrot dangling on it, the donkey's moving forward all the time, just like modern science is, but it's never quite going to get to the carrot. So that puts the lie to, I think that you described that a different approach of looking at scientific explanations and answers. I mean, the way I personally say is I don't believe anything. I either know it or I don't know it, and on that basis I know almost nothing. all I've got is my best impression of reality at this point in time. It may change.
Yes, you're right. I think that's actually the right attitude, and it's a very, very difficult psychologically. I think many people, I appreciate that many people find this very difficult because we're driven by these questions. Where do we come from? Where does everything come from? Why is it like this and not like that? And I think you have to, of course, these kind of questions make us go on looking for answers, and I think they are fundamental to all our human and cultural activity. But I think it's wrong, scientifically speaking, certainly, to jump to conclusions and be narrow-minded about the final answer. I think we have to remain open about it. And then on top of it, you also nicely said that we have ultimately are really pictures of reality and representations of reality, and we can verify them experimentally, but they are still just different models of reality. And it could well be, as philosophers usually like to point out, it could be that reality is very different to what we imagine and what we see through our own senses. Maybe they are deceiving us. Maybe they are deceiving us in a very consistent way, that it's all still consistent with all our experiments. But I think it's very hard to go beyond that and say, what is really the ultimate reality. We have to even be open to the fact that we might never get there, because we are limited in very specific ways in how we receive this information.
Well, that idea in itself is kind of disturbing, that there may be things beyond
yes.
human comprehension. Because I speak to scientists and mainly sort of materialists and people who describe themselves as humanists, not so much people who have religion, because they have their own answers and they can sleep at night and they're content that they know something about what's going on.
Yes.
And this idea of this fundamental uncertainty, I see so much profound disturbance in the eyes sometimes when I speak to people who call themselves rational, because they want the answers to be in, and I understand that. But I actually find if you take the attitude that, I haven't got a clue what's going on, the universe is crazy, I don't understand 1% of it, it can actually be quite liberating in a way. You can be playful with it. We don't need to have all the answers.
Absolutely. I think you're going back to the kind of Socratic logic. And I think certainly our even the scientific enterprise arises out of these very fundamental questions that people like Socrates and Plato raised. And they actually raised them in a way that they ought to be debated and not necessarily concluded. These are also dialogues that are very open-ended in all of these Platonic dialogues. And I think science, that is the right spirit of science. What's interesting, you also reminded me now when we spoke about our limitations. I remember this very, very simple experiment where I think they tested some chimpanzees in the first instance. And then they took a group of 4-year-old children and gave them the same task. So the task, I think they gave them a piece of stick whose one side, whose basically what they had to do is place this stick on one side and balance it on one side on its own. And whenever a chimp would do that, it would get a reward. It would get some sweets, a banana, something like that. And what they did then is they tricked the chimp. They gave the chimp a stick with one end that was curved, so you could never really balance the stick on that end. And so the chimp would try once, and the stick would fall down. It would try again, and on average, after 3 or 4 times, the chimp would simply give up. He would just realize that he couldn't balance the stick, and he would go out and just do something else. And then they repeated the same experiment with kids. And a 4-year-old child would try to balance the stick would fall down. It would try again, and the stick would fall down. And the first thing the child would then do is flip it upside down and feel the bottom of the stick. And it would realize that the reason why it cannot stand is that the bottom is curved. And it's amazing that chimps, even adult chimps, don't have this instinctively in them to look for reasons for something to happen. whereas a 4-year-old child already has it built in. So we humans are intrinsically, biologically looking for reasons for things. We see footprints in the sand, and we ask immediately, what kind of footprints, what kind of animal does this belong to? And I think chimps already, even the closest of our relatives do not have this kind of inquisitiveness built in. And if you look at the gap between us and the chimps in this respect, you could imagine that there could be another species whose gap between us and them is basically is of the same order of magnitude as between us and chimps. And that's why I say that it would be presumptuous to think that we are the last the last on this evolutionary scale, and that there can't be something. Some entity, some biological entity coming later that could be much smarter than us, of course, and that could see more things and perceive more things. So I think we even have to be open to this possibility.
Well, there's a lot of talk amongst transhumanist types about sort of merging with machines.
Yes.
Personally, I think that's not going to turn out well. I don't have a scientific background, but my senses tell me it's something that's not going to live up to the hopes that transhumanists have for it.
Yes.
And I think could potentially be a lot of problems. I think they fundamentally misunderstand what it is to be human.
Yes, I think you can already see how interesting it is that our technology has been developing rapidly, and still actually we rely on basic human contact. Whenever we want to meet someone, discuss anything, negotiate a deal, I think it still counts a lot to meet that person. It's not enough to talk to them on the phone or even on Skype or anything else. And I think you are right. Technology develops a lot and it helps us a lot. But I think there are things that are still intrinsically human, and it's very hard to see how to substitute that technologically.
Well, one phenomenon that's occurred in my life, and I'm sure many other people's lives since the advent of the internet and email, the absurd notion of an urgent email. I get emails every now and again, and yes. I'll get an email an hour later going with all capitals, "Please reply immediately." And, these have arrived while I've been out.
Yes.
And I'll say to the person who sent them, well, you don't email the fire brigade saying, "My house is on fire, please come soon." You got to phone them up.
Yes, that's right.
So I said, "You've got my phone number, just ring." But anyway, that's just a little, pet peeve. But in terms of the idea you mentioned about the possibility of reality fundamentally being different to what we perceive
yes.
it, our senses are perhaps being some way tricked, even if it is consistently. Of course, this is an ancient idea. It is
yes.
in spiritual circles, the idea that we're living in Maya, in illusion. And
yes.
I'm drawn back to the idea of Plato's cave allegory.
Yes.
And I've often
yes.
wondered, in a lot of the discourse, scientific and religious and in between, even right throughout the ages of humanity, I'm continuing right to the modern day, there's this idea of the world being something other than what we think it is. And the question then is, in a world of blind people, where would the idea of seeing even arise? We have
yes.
this persistent notion that there's something we're missing, and religious people are looking for it, people like you are looking for it, and we're not there yet. And of course, maybe we never will be.
Yes. I think in fact, all of us are very familiar with exactly what you said, namely that our visual sense is, our vision is so much stronger than the other senses, that it frequently overshadows other senses. So I think if you want to listen to a piece of music, then it's very advisable to be in a dark room and even to close your eyes, because then you are really concentrating on what you are listening. Otherwise, you have to take in all this visual information that overfloods your brain, and it's very hard to concentrate on what you are hearing. So you're right, the world must be a very, very different place to people who cannot see properly. And I think this goes in the direction of, and you are right, a great deal of Eastern mysticism is based on the fact that maybe our senses, rather than helping us see the reality the way it is, they are inhibiting us, because they concentrate maybe on the wrong aspects of reality, or maybe they just transcribe it in the way that doesn't correspond to reality itself. I think this was beautifully, as we know, this was really beautifully written about by Aldous Huxley, right? The Doors of Perception. And I think he experimented with drugs during that period when he was writing this book. And I think his point was that once you eliminate your senses, you really get in touch with a reality that appears to you then infinite, basically, rather than discrete and compartmentalized in different departments. You actually see it all as one continuous infinite whole. And I think that's a very interesting idea that, is this the right approach of us basing everything on our senses and interacting with the world and then experimenting is this even the right approach to the ultimate reality? I think we don't know.
Well, I think the question then of sixth sense and just other modes of perceiving beyond what, for example, scientists might employ, measuring and weighing and calculating.
Right. That's
I mean, the notion that you touch in the book about determinism versus free will.
Yes.
You were saying the idea that we don't have free will kind of insults our intelligence or our senses anyway. And in questions like that, I personally side with my senses because I don't have anything else. I can't empirically say one way or another. No one can. And as you point out, the idea of us not having free will feels wrong. And if that's all you've got to go on, maybe you should consider that. And this idea of intuition, and I think that you've also come around to the idea that there's a lot of scientific inquiry that might have to hinge on, or at least move forward on that sort of basis, because it cannot be empirically proven or measured.
Yes. I think there is a great deal of assumptions that we actually take on board even when we do science, which themselves cannot be really investigated scientifically. So you take them on board and because they work basically, and then you proceed like that and see whether you encounter any problems. But I think the question of free will is really fascinating, and I think I mentioned in the book as well that it's clear that science finds it very difficult to deal with that, because neither determinism nor randomness can really give rise to what we feel is behind free will. So, if the universe is really deterministic, then the free will is simply just an illusion. And whatever I decide to do is really already predetermined by the previous state of myself and whatever is external to myself. But if the universe is genuinely random, as quantum mechanics would suggest, then also it's very hard to argue that I have some kind of free will, because then ultimately it would all be really decided by these microscopic random events, and that would also mean that I have no influence on what I'm doing, and that's really interesting. So neither of these two extremes explains it, and it just makes you wonder whether this already is telling us that we are missing extra ingredients in order to describe this phenomenon. So I agree with you, following your intuition, that we all feel that we have free will, and when we get up in the morning and we choose to have one breakfast rather than another, or we choose coffee or tea, we strongly feel that this was the choice that we made and that we are responsible for that, and therefore it's not impossible. And I think people like even some physicists in the past, like Erwin Schrödinger, I think, they were open to the possibility that we might need some new kind of physics to explain phenomena that pertain to the biological world. And I think the free will is probably one of those highest level phenomena as far as we are concerned.
And I suppose there's no reason to think that, even with the work that you've been doing in your career, that the quantum reality is fundamentally it, that we don't understand it yet. The whole thing seems extremely bizarre, but it's some kind of fundamental level. I mean, there could be infinite, I'm going to use that word again, but there could be a great deal more underlying that.
Absolutely. I think the spirit in which you should take it is that this is really the most accurate description we have at the moment. And it's certainly better than anything we had before. And it feels to me something that can go beyond these notions like matter and energy that we discussed at the very beginning. But there is certainly no indication that this is the ultimate. And I think we can never really say that scientifically.
Towards the end of the book, you start to get into some of the implications,
Yes.
or I should say perhaps uses,
Yes.
for some of this research. And people
Yes.
may or may not have heard about quantum computing.
Yes.
I've read not a great deal about this, but it seems at the same time incredibly exciting and also completely baffling to someone like me, just simply trying to get my head around how you do computing at the quantum level. You know, a quantum computer, I mean, you describe building it, but is anything built? Where
Yes.
is it? Where is it? What's it made of?
It's still, it's a good question. It's still in our heads, the large scale quantum computer, but we have some very small computers that behave fully quantum mechanically. At present, we can go up to roughly 20 quantum bits. So one possible implementation would be to take 20 atoms and line them up in a very, very small volume of space. We'd be talking about something whose diameter is maybe a millionth of a meter, a micron, very small. So this is a computer that you wouldn't really be able to see with the naked eye, so to speak. And what you have to be able to do then is manipulate these atoms in a very coherent way. Usually this is done by using lasers, which interact with these atoms, and then you can prepare them in different quantum states. And the main idea behind quantum computation is that they could explore many different possibilities at the same time, rather than doing just one computation and then another computation sequentially. They could really work in parallel. But in order to make this really more powerful than anything we have at present, we would need to have at least 1,000 quantum bits. So we are quite a long way away. We have 20 at the moment at best, and we have to bridge this gap between 20 and, let's say, 1,000 or 10,000 or more. I think it's fair to say that we don't really have any idea what technology will get us there. People pursue maybe 10 or 20 different promising technologies, but I think we don't really know how to make 1,000 qubits or more with any one of them. And it's possible that we might have to make some kind of hybrid of all of these technologies in order to arrive at the genuine quantum computer.
Well, if you postulate that the amount of information in the universe is increasing,
yes,
and our information processing power is increasing, I don't know if the rate of either of those increases is in itself increasing, but it just makes me ponder, as a non-scientist, at what point, what we're increasing our information processing capability for, thinking of, computational capacity compared to the human dimension, human needs, what we're actually doing with our lives. Is information just going to carry on exponentially increasing as computing power exponentially increases? And if so, what for? Are we going to start sleeping less so we can process more information? Again, it's a bit of a philosophical question.
Yes, I think it's a very good point, because basically, according to quantum mechanics, the amount of information that you can encode into an object is really proportional to, this holographic principle, that it's proportional to the area of that object. And as far as we know, the area of the universe, the whole universe, is expanding. And the latest astronomical observations suggest that it will continue to expand. It will never really contract back, which means that the area of the universe should be getting larger and larger, which means, according to quantum mechanics, that there will be an increase in capacity to encode more and more quantum bits in the universe. Of course, whether you can access all of these extra degrees of freedom and how well you can encode information and how quickly you can process information is really down to our technology. We don't really know how to do it. You frequently read that the biggest capacity given the size of the object, lies in black holes, because they're extremely dense forms of matter. So ideally, if you want your best quantum computer, you should really take a black hole. But then, practically speaking, we have no idea how to encode information into black holes, how to process information with black holes, how to extract it. And for all that we know, maybe this is actually ultimately not even possible. So I think your question depends on technology, but I think it depends also on what we discussed before, on our human limitations. We could be making our technology more and more efficient, but the question is, does this suit our human needs? Does it make any sense given our psychology, inborn psychology? And I think this is a completely open question. I mean, that the size of computers is simply governed by the size of our, the keyboard size is just simply governed by the size of our hands. You could eliminate that by possibly running computations in a different way. Maybe we can interact with the computer in a more direct way. Maybe it can be coupled to our brain directly, and we can direct computations using our thoughts, in which case maybe the whole process could be more efficient and more optimal. And I think this goes in the direction of what you mentioned before, us maybe being integrated more with technology. But I think you are completely right that this may not ultimately satisfy our basic human needs. So I think it's a big question whether we will continue to go in that direction.
Well, this reminds me of when I bought, as a writer, I was very excited and very hopeful when I got my voice recognition software back in the late 90s. It was complete rubbish.
Yes.
And I found out I was going to have to train it for an extended period of time. So I threw that out. And I'm not sure how much that's advanced in the interim. The reason I mention it is because it reminds us that the computer, my PC, it doesn't understand anything.
Yes.
It's crunching numbers. So that made me think about this human-computer interface. Lots of dystopian sci-fi shows supercomputers running amok. But one of the things that they appear to be is sort of not inherently stupid. They have this information processing power, but they don't understand meaning.
Yes,
and
you're right.
That's what human interaction is all about.
That's right. I think there's a beautiful quote by Picasso you reminded me of, which goes something like this. I think he says, computers are useless. They can only give you answers. And I think that's exactly right, that, you have to ask a computer a question, and you have to ask it in a very, very specific way, unlike humans. And only then the computer can give you basically possibly the right answer to your question. But I think what humans are all about is they're all about asking questions themselves and interacting with the rest of the universe. And in that sense, all our computers are very primitive. Even the most sophisticated ones are, as you said, very stupid, really. I mean, they have no will of their own. Of course, people who work in the artificial intelligence will tell you that maybe it's just a matter of time before we can mimic with computers some kind of human behavior. But this is another field that's been out there for the last 50 years making very similar claims, but I think they too have made very little progress. Exactly like voice recognition. I think initially it looked much more promising than what we think about it now. And it just makes you wonder whether they're missing some key ingredients, some key bits of understanding in order to achieve something like that.
Well, Vlatko, there's a lot more in the book that we won't have time to get to. I mean, you get into everything from diet planning to investment strategies and a section on global warming, which is very interesting indeed.
Yes.
But basically in the final chapter, you talk about our reality emerging, once again, information from emptiness, which we talked about towards the top. And you mentioned this point. I kept coming back again. This is why I was awake until 3 or something like that, thinking that, okay, well, how can something come from nothing? No matter any way you express this, you can call information what you like. How could this happen? And you introduced the idea of, again, genuine randomness again, and randomness that you write about in the book. And that I can't remember what your exact line was, but it echoed something that somebody had written earlier about there was a I can't remember the exact word, but it was something like there was nothingness, and then suddenly there was a ripple in the nothingness, a random ripple in the nothingness, and then stuff popped up.
Yes.
But why would that even happen? I mean, again, I know you don't have the answer to that question, but just in terms of how you conclude the book, perhaps you could say something about that idea.
I think you're absolutely right. It's very ideally we would like to assume as little structure as possible in what we call nothingness. So we really want it to be as close to nothingness as it can be, in the sense of the absence of not just energy and matter, but absence even of the laws of physics or any other notions that we have at present. And then, of course, you can say, what does it really mean that the first random event happens? In some sense, randomness would say that we shouldn't really be looking for any prior causes. But I think still the arena within which this event has to happen has to have a little bit more structure for you to start to describe anything. So I think I gave this analogy with a sculptor who starts with a block of stone, and so basically this stone could end up being whatever the sculptor decides, whichever sculpture he really ultimately wants to make. But before he starts doing anything, you could think of this as the universe. So you could think of nothingness in the complementary way, that this is a state that contains all possibilities, but none of them actually realized yet, until you start to break this symmetry of all possibilities and start to go down one particular route. I have a feeling that this first event really cannot have any cause prior to it, simply because otherwise it's just very difficult to not to engage even more structure into the whole thing. So basically this first event would be a little bit like the first cut that the sculptor makes. He could slice it in half, if you like, and decide to make something smaller and things like that. But I think you're absolutely right. We scientists also are completely baffled at what this first event could possibly be. And then, of course, the subsequent events would somehow have to remain consistent with respect to the first event, whatever consistency mean. Again, to talk about consistency, you have to have some basic notions, some basic laws. But I think then it would go in this direction of an overall order, that anything that happens subsequently would have to somehow conform to the prior events. And ideally, you'd like the laws of physics to emerge in this way, as well as all the stuff in the universe and the universe itself. But it's very hard to imagine how exactly this would work.
Well, you heard it first here, folks. That's it settled. Well, Vlatko, today we've been talking about your book. Once again, it's Decoding Reality, The Universe as Quantum Information. That's available everywhere. But is there anything you'd like to share with listeners, a website, or perhaps news of what you're working on?
I think the most exciting thing I can mention now is possibly the idea to take quantum information into space. And I think this maybe is a nice conclusion, because it touches on one of the earlier discussions we had. I think whatever we think about the development of technology, I think ultimately it might be beneficial for us humans to leave the Earth and start to colonize other planets. And I think what this means is that we need a sufficiently developed technology in order to be able to do that. And I think in my particular field, it's very exciting that people are now taking quantum information and quantum technology and trying to implement that in when it comes to communications between Earth and satellites and different satellites and so on. I think we'll have to be able to control more and more of the solar system. And I really genuinely believe that our survival probably will depend on some kind of technology of this type.
Fascinating. Well, Vlatko, thank you so much for joining us today on legalizefreedom.com.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Well, folks, that's it for another week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please check out the website. That's legalizefreedom.com, legalize-freedom.com, where you'll find an archive of programmes offering alternative views on a wide range of topics, including world affairs, politics and economics, science and technology, religion and spirituality, conspiracy, and alternative history. You can also browse and buy a range of books and DVDs from our guests, and if you're feeling generous, make a donation to help keep the site up and running. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to LegalizeFreedom.com.
Thank you.